People panic when they hear the word emergency, because emergencies don't ask permission and they don't care if you feel ready. They interrupt routines, shatter excuses, and expose what you've been ignoring while pretending everything was under control. You tell yourself life is calm, manageable, predictable. And then suddenly there's pressure in the air, like something important is already moving and you're the last to notice. You've been treating waiting like a delay, like nothing serious was happening, like time was just passing. But emergencies don't come with sirens at first. They come as unease, restlessness, a feeling that something is about to collide with your life, whether you're prepared or not. You sense it in the quiet moments, when distractions stop working and your thoughts get louder. That's not anxiety. That's awareness waking up too late to be comfortable. When something is sent in urgency, it's not for entertainment or comfort. It's because timing matters now. Because hesitation costs something. Because whatever is approaching isn't meant to find you distracted, compromised, or pretending you don't feel the shift. Emergencies don't ask you to believe harder. They demand that you pay attention before you miss what was meant to reach you intact. You've been moving slowly, carefully, convincing yourself there's time. That you'll fix things later, prepare later, become ready later. But urgency doesn't wait for self-improvement plans. It arrives when it must, not when you feel complete. And the truth is, what's being sent isn't responding to your comfort. It's responding to necessity. People misunderstand urgency. They think it's chaos. It's not. It's precision under pressure. It's alignment accelerating because delay would cause damage. When something arrives urgently, it's because staying as you are is no longer safe, no longer sustainable, no longer enough. Emergencies exist to force movement where denial has created stagnation. You might think you're unprepared to receive anything significant right now. Too messy, too tired, too uncertain. But emergencies don't arrive to perfect condition. They arrive to break patterns that would otherwise continue destroying you quietly. They don't knock politely. They show up because waiting longer would cost more than the discomfort of interruption. There's a reason this feels heavy. Important things carry weight. They shift balance. They rearrange priorities. You can't receive something urgent and stay the same. And that's what makes people resist, not fear of arrival, but fear of transformation. Fear that once this reaches you, pretending won't work anymore. An emergency doesn't mean danger alone. It means importance under pressure. It means something matters enough to interrupt your routine, your excuses, your delays. It means you're being reached now, not later, because later would be too late. You don't get emergencies when nothing is at stake. You get them when something essential is on the line. When timing intersects with consequence. When waiting would mean loss. Whatever is coming isn't random. It's not accidental. It's responding to a moment that has already passed the point of comfort. You can feel it because your instincts are louder than your logic right now. Your mind wants to downplay it, rationalize it, slow it down. But urgency doesn't negotiate. It just approaches quietly, relentlessly, unannounced. And whether you're ready or not stops mattering the moment it gets close. Enough to change everything you thought was stable, everything you thought could wait, everything you convinced yourself wasn't serious. Yet urgency doesn't whisper, but it doesn't scream either. It presses. It leans in close enough that you feel it before you understand it. People like to think intervention comes wrapped in comfort, like a gentle suggestion you can schedule for later. But real intervention shows up when patience has expired, when delay has become dangerous, when something higher decides that waiting any longer would cost too much. Divine intervention isn't dramatic the way movies sell it. There's no lightning, no booming voice, no countdown clock in the sky. It's a shift in pressure. a tightening of moments, a sense that everything casual suddenly feels irresponsible. You start noticing patterns breaking, routines feeling fragile, distractions losing their grip. That's not coincidence. That's urgency tapping you on the shoulder without asking if you're ready to listen. People misunderstand urgency as punishment. They assume something went wrong. But intervention doesn't arrive because you failed. It arrives because something matters now, because a window is closing, because staying asleep would do more harm than waking you abruptly. Urgency is not about fear. It's about precision. It shows up exactly when comfort becomes a liability. You've been treating time like it's neutral, like it just passes without consequence. Intervention changes that. Suddenly every moment feels weighted. Choices feel sharper. Silence feels louder. You can't drift anymore. You're being called into awareness whether you want to be or not. That's what makes it uncomfortable. Not the pressure itself, but the demand for attention. When intervention happens, it doesn't ask you to believe more. It asks you to notice more. To stop numbing yourself with routines that no longer fit. To stop assuming tomorrow will give you another chance to respond. Urgency removes the illusion of endless time. It doesn't threaten you. It tells you the truth you've been postponing. People often resist intervention because it interrupts their story, the plan they had, the pace they preferred, the version of themselves that wasn't ready to change yet. But intervention isn't interested in your schedule. It responds to alignment, not comfort. It arrives when movement is required, not when confidence is complete. There's a reason urgency feels personal, because it is. It's tailored. It hits the exact places you've been avoiding, the conversations you delayed, the decisions you softened, the truths you negotiated with. Intervention doesn't circle around those areas. It goes straight through them, not to hurt you, but to stop the slow damage of avoidance. Divine urgency doesn't mean chaos. It means order demanding to be restored. It means something essential is out of place and can't be ignored anymore. When intervention shows up, it's because the cost of staying the same has exceeded the cost of disruption. That's why it feels intense. Because intensity is required to break inertia. You might think you're unprepared, too flawed, too late, too inconsistent. Intervention doesn't wait for perfection. It waits for necessity. And necessity has its own timeline. You weren't skipped. You weren't forgotten. You were allowed time until time stopped being safe. Urgency also reveals priorities, what you drop, what you cling to, what suddenly feels trivial. Intervention exposes the gap between what you say matters and what you actually respond to under pressure. It strips away performance and leaves instinct. And instinct doesn't lie. People like to romanticize waiting for signs. Intervention is the sign. The restlessness, the interruption, the sudden seriousness you can't shake. That's not anxiety. That's alignment demanding action. Anxiety scatters. Intervention focuses. When something is sent urgently, it's not optional. You can ignore it, but you can't neutralize it. It will keep pressing until you respond or until the opportunity reshapes itself without you. That's the part no one likes to hear. Urgency doesn't beg. It proceeds. You don't get intervention when nothing is at stake. You get it when something essential is approaching a point of no return. When timing matters more than comfort. When delay becomes a form of loss. That's why urgency feels heavy. Because it carries consequence. People ask why now? Why this moment? Why this pressure? Because now is when avoidance stopped being harmless. Because now is when attention became necessary. Because now is when something meaningful is close enough that missing it would change the trajectory in ways you can't undo. Urgency doesn't come to scare you, it comes to wake you, to narrow your focus, to strip away excuses that were slowly eroding your path. It arrives because something important is moving toward you faster than your old habits can handle. Intervention doesn't promise comfort. It promises relevance. It pulls you into the present with force because drifting any longer would mean disconnecting from what's being sent. And once urgency enters the room, pretending you didn't feel it becomes impossible because something in you already knows that this moment isn't casual, that time just became sharp, that attention is no longer optional, that whatever is unfolding has crossed into necessity. And that staying distracted now would cost more than facing the pressure head on as it closes in. People love the idea of being ready. It makes them feel in control, responsible, deserving. They tell themselves they'll act when they feel stronger, clearer, more confident, more complete. Readiness becomes a shield, a polite excuse to stay where they are without admitting they're afraid of what comes next. But timing doesn't care about your comfort checklist. It moves on its own schedule, and when it arrives, it doesn't wait for you to finish preparing. Personal readiness is often just fear wearing a neat outfit. Fear of failing. Fear of changing. Fear of being seen before you feel polished enough to be accepted. So you delay, you rehearse, you promise yourself one more phase, one more fix, one more improvement before you step into what's calling you. Timing watches all of this quietly and keeps moving anyway. There's a cruel honesty to timing. It shows up when conditions align externally, not when you feel internally settled. Because if timing waited for personal readiness, nothing important would ever happen. People would stay hidden forever, perfecting themselves in private, waiting for a confidence that only comes after action, not before it. You don't get chosen because you're ready. You get chosen because the moment requires you. Timing responds to necessity, not hesitation. When something is meant to intersect your life, it arrives when it must, not when you feel qualified to receive it. And that's where panic enters. Because suddenly your excuses collapse. You can't say later anymore. The moment is standing in front of you, unimpressed by your doubts. People confuse readiness with worthiness. They think not feeling ready means they're not good enough yet. But timing doesn't measure worth that way. It measures position, alignment, and momentum. You can be unsure and still be exactly where you need to be. You can be messy and still be necessary. You can be afraid and still be chosen. Timing exposes a harsh truth. You were never going to feel fully ready. That feeling is a myth people chase to avoid risk. Real moments arrive with uncertainty attached. They demand growth in motion. They force you to become the person you thought you needed to be before the moment came. There's a reason timing feels intrusive. It interrupts your self-image. You wanted to arrive confident, composed, impressive. Timing arrives and says now, stripping away the performance. It doesn't ask you to be fearless. It asks you to be present. Fear can come along. Doubt can come along. Hesitation can come along. But stopping cannot. People who miss moments often say they weren't ready. What they really mean is they didn't want to risk being unprepared in public. Timing doesn't protect your pride. It prioritizes movement. It pushes you into situations that stretch you because staying the same would cost more than adapting under pressure. Readiness is internal. Timing is external. And external forces win every time. You don't tell storms when you're ready to be tested. You don't tell change to wait until you feel calm. Timing arrives when the conditions demand action, not when your emotions give permission. This is why timing feels unfair, because it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't slow down so you can catch your breath. It just presents the moment and watches what you do with it. Accept, resist, run, freeze. Those reactions reveal more than readiness ever could. When timing overrides readiness, it's not to humiliate you. It's to move you, to pull you out of stagnation disguised as preparation, to stop you from hiding behind endless self-improvement while life passes you by. Timing doesn't want the perfect version of you. It wants the present one. People often think they failed because they struggled when the moment arrived. Struggle doesn't mean misalignment. Struggle means expansion. Growth is uncomfortable by design. If timing waited for comfort, it would lose its purpose. There's also urgency in timing. Windows open and close. Opportunities don't hover indefinitely while you build confidence. They pass through. They respond to momentum in the environment, not emotional certainty. Miss the window, and the lesson changes shape. It comes back harder, sharper, less forgiving. Timing teaches trust the hard way. Trust that you'll adapt. Trust that you'll learn while moving. Trust that clarity can come after commitment. People want clarity first. Timing gives clarity later. When timing overrides readiness, it exposes how much you rely on control. You wanted to choreograph the moment. Decide when you'd step forward. Choose the version of yourself that would be seen. Timing ignores all of that. It pulls you onto the stage before you feel rehearsed and watches whether you rise or retreat. The people who grow the most aren't the ones who felt ready. They're the ones who moved anyway, who let the moment shape them instead of waiting to shape themselves perfectly first. Who understood that readiness is often built in response, not in isolation. Timing doesn't punish hesitation immediately. It lets you feel the weight of the choice, the tension, the pressure, the sense that something is slipping. And in that pressure, you see the truth that waiting for readiness was never about preparation. It was about fear of stepping into a moment that would change you before you felt in control of who you were becoming, before you could soften the impact, before you could protect the version of yourself that felt safe in delay. Because once timing takes the lead, you either move with it or watch it pass. Indifferent to how ready you thought you needed to be, distraction is polite sabotage. It doesn't attack you. It entertains you. It keeps you busy enough to feel productive while slowly pulling your eyes away from what actually matters. Attention is sharp. Distraction is soft. That's why people choose distraction. It doesn't demand anything from you except your time. And time is the one thing you give away without noticing. Attention feels uncomfortable because it forces responsibility. When you pay attention, you can't pretend you didn't see the signs. You can't claim ignorance. You can't blame confusion. Distraction gives you plausible deniability. It lets you say you were overwhelmed, tired, busy, caught up. Attention removes those excuses and replaces them with clarity you're not always ready to act on. Most people don't lose direction because they're stupid or careless. They lose it because they're distracted at the wrong moment. They look away just long enough for something important to pass quietly, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough that later they say they don't know how things ended up this way. Distraction thrives in noise, endless information, endless opinions, endless entertainment. It fragments your focus into harmless pieces until nothing has enough weight to demand a response. Attention, on the other hand, narrows the world. It makes things feel heavier, more urgent, more real. And that weight scares people who would rather float than commit. When something important approaches, distraction increases, not by accident. Pressure makes the mind seek relief. And relief comes in the form of scrolling, chatting, overthinking, multitasking. Anything to avoid the discomfort of noticing that something needs a decision now. Distraction is the brain's way of sedating urgency. Attention doesn't ask you to believe anything new. It asks you to stop looking away, to notice patterns you've been dismissing, to see repetitions you've been calling coincidences, to recognize when your environment starts speaking louder than your excuses. Attention turns subtle signals into undeniable facts. People often confuse distraction with rest. Rest restores, distraction depletes, rest leaves you clearer, distraction leaves you foggy. But distraction feels easier because it doesn't ask you to sit with your thoughts. Attention does. And sitting with your thoughts means facing truths you've been postponing. Attention reveals timing. When you're distracted, everything feels random. When you're attentive, you start seeing alignment. You notice how certain moments cluster, how opportunities don't appear evenly spaced but come in waves. Distraction misses waves. Attention rides them. The dangerous thing about distraction is that it feels harmless in small doses. A few minutes here, a little avoidance there. But timing doesn't measure distraction in minutes. It measures it in missed responses, in moments where awareness should have turned into action and didn't. Attention isn't dramatic, it's deliberate. It's choosing to stay present when your instincts want to escape. It's noticing discomfort instead of numbing it. It's listening when something inside you says, "Pay attention now," and not drowning that voice out with noise. Distraction keeps you reacting. Attention lets you respond. Reaction is fast and sloppy. Response is intentional. When you're distracted, you jump at symptoms. When you're attentive, you address causes. That difference determines whether you keep repeating the same patterns or finally break them. There's a reason people say they didn't see it coming. They did. They just didn't give it their attention. They felt the tension, the shift, the unease. But they chose distraction because attention would have required change, and change feels heavier than denial. Attention also exposes priorities, not the ones you claim, but the ones you live. Whatever consistently gets your attention owns your direction. Distraction lets you pretend you care about important things while feeding trivial ones. Attention forces honesty. It shows you exactly where your energy goes, when no one is watching. When urgency enters a situation, distraction becomes dangerous. It blunts instinct. It delays recognition. It stretches the gap between signal and response. Attention closes that gap. It sharpens awareness. It compresses time. It forces you into the present where decisions actually matter. People often wait for motivation to pay attention. Attention comes first. Motivation follows clarity. You don't get inspired while distracted. You get inspired when something finally has your full focus and refuses to be ignored. Attention feels risky because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending you didn't know. Distraction offers an escape hatch. Attention seals the room and turns on the light. There's also fear in attention. Fear that if you focus, you'll have to act. That action will cost you comfort, relationships, routines, identities you've outgrown but still cling to. Distraction protects those attachments. Attention threatens them. When something important is approaching, your attention is the invitation, not belief, not hope. Attention. What you notice expands. What you ignore fades. If you keep feeding distractions, you starve the very awareness needed to recognize what's arriving. Attention doesn't mean panic. It means presence. Calm, focused, unblinking presence. It means you stop scattering yourself across 10 directions and stand still long enough to see what's moving toward you. Distraction tells you there's time. Attention tells you there's a moment. And moments don't wait. They pass through. cleanly, quietly, without explaining themselves. When attention replaces distraction, things don't suddenly become easy, they become clear. And clarity is dangerous because it removes excuses. It shows you what requires response now, not later. What needs action, not analysis. What can't be postponed without consequence. The shift from distraction to attention is subtle but irreversible. Once you start noticing, the noise loses its power, the urgency sharpens, the signals align, and what was once background pressure steps into focus, demanding presence, demanding response, demanding that you stop looking away just as the moment reaches you close enough that distraction can no longer protect you from the weight of seeing exactly what is happening right now. Delay feels harmless at first. It feels like breathing room, like caution, like you're being smart by not rushing into something you don't fully understand yet. Delay lets you believe you're protecting yourself, but delay is never neutral. It's active. It's doing something while pretending to do nothing. And what it's doing is quietly raising the price. Every moment you hesitate, something shifts. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to change the equation. Windows don't slam shut when you delay. They narrow. Paths don't disappear. They get harder to walk. Delay doesn't punish you immediately. It waits. It lets the cost accumulate until you're too invested in staying still to move easily. People think the cost of action is risk. They forget the cost of delay is erosion. Confidence erodes. Clarity erodes. Opportunity erodes. And the longer you wait, the more you have to overcome just to get back to the same starting point you were standing on when the signal first appeared. Delay feeds on rationalization. You tell yourself you need more information, more time, more signs. You convince yourself you're being responsible. But deep down, delay is often fear negotiating for comfort. Fear says just a little longer, just until things feel safer, just until you're more certain. And while you're negotiating, the situation keeps moving without you. The dangerous thing about delay is that it disguises itself as patience. Real patience is intentional. Delay is avoidance pretending to be wisdom. Patience holds position with awareness. Delay looks away and hopes the pressure will go down on its own. It rarely does. Every delay changes the condition. People change. Circumstances shift. Energy cools. What was once available freely now requires effort, explanation, repair. You don't come back to the same moment after waiting too long. You come back to a version of it that's been affected by your absence. Delay also compounds fear. The longer you wait, the bigger the action feels. What could have been a step becomes a leap. What could have been a conversation becomes a confrontation. Delay turns manageable moments into intimidating ones simply by letting them sit unresolved. People often say they missed their chance. Chances don't vanish instantly. They deteriorate. They weaken. They lose momentum. Delay drains the natural energy that carries things forward when timing is right. When you finally decide to move, you're pushing against resistance that didn't exist before. Delay costs honesty. The more time passes, the harder it is to speak plainly. You start adding explanations, justifications, backstory. You lose the clean simplicity of responding when the moment was fresh. What could have been direct becomes complicated. What could have been clear becomes awkward. There's also an internal cost. Delay teaches you to doubt your instincts. Every time you feel a nudge and ignore it, you weaken your trust in yourself. You start questioning whether your awareness is reliable. Over time, you become slower to respond, less confident in your judgment, more dependent on external confirmation. Delay creates emotional debt. Unspoken words don't disappear. Unmade decisions don't dissolve. They sit in the background, taking up mental space, draining energy. You think you're resting by delaying, but you're actually carrying unresolved weight everywhere you go. People underestimate how expensive delay becomes because the payments are invisible at first. Missed momentum, lost simplicity, increased resistance, diminished clarity. By the time the bill arrives, it feels overwhelming, and you wonder why something that seemed so small now feels so heavy. Delay also reshapes identity. You start seeing yourself as someone who waits, who hesitates, who needs more time. That self-image reinforces itself. Each delay makes the next one easier. Action starts feeling foreign. Stillness starts feeling normal. And normal doesn't mean healthy. It just means familiar. Opportunities respond to movement. They don't chase hesitation. When you delay, you're not just waiting. You're signaling uncertainty. And uncertainty changes how situations respond to you. Things stop leaning toward you. They become neutral. Or worse, they move on. The longer you delay, the more courage you need. Not because the situation got worse, but because you let fear grow unchecked. Fear thrives in empty time. It fills the gap with worst-case scenarios, doubts, and imagined consequences that feel more real than the actual risk ever was. Delay convinces you that waiting keeps you safe. In reality, it keeps you stuck. Safety without movement turns into stagnation, and stagnation quietly costs more than failure ever could. There's a reason moments feel urgent when they arrive. It's not to scare you. It's to protect you from the hidden costs of delay. Urgency is timing's way of saying respond now, while the price is still reasonable. People who move early don't avoid consequences. They choose manageable ones. People who delay don't avoid risk. They defer it until it's heavier, messier, and harder to navigate. Delay doesn't mean nothing happens. It means things happen without your input. Decisions get made by default. Paths close quietly. Energy shifts away. And by the time you decide to act, you're responding to outcomes instead of shaping them. The cost of delay is rarely paid up front. It's paid later, with interest, in regret, in complexity, in misalignment, in the exhausting effort required to revive something that would have moved effortlessly if you had responded when the moment was alive. Every time you hesitate, ask yourself not what you're avoiding now, but what you're agreeing to pay later. Because delay always charges something: time, clarity, simplicity, self-trust. And the bill doesn't care how reasonable your excuses were when you chose to wait instead of respond. Why? The cost was still low enough to move without damage, before hesitation hardened into habit, before the moment cooled into memory. Before what was once urgent became another thing you almost did but didn't. Discomfort is the part everyone tries to skip, negotiate with, or soften until it barely means anything. People love the idea of transformation, the outer picture, the confidence, the clarity, the relief. They just don't want the phase where everything feels wrong at the same time. That's because discomfort doesn't feel like progress. It feels like loss of control. It feels like instability. It feels like something breaking instead of something becoming. But nothing transforms without first becoming uncomfortable. Comfort is preservation. Discomfort is disruption. And disruption is the only thing strong enough to break patterns that have been quietly controlling you for years. If something feels uncomfortable, it's usually because it's touching a habit, an identity, or a belief that no longer fits, and those don't loosen their grip politely. People often assume discomfort means they're doing something wrong. That belief keeps them trapped. They retreat the moment things feel tense, awkward, uncertain. They run back to what's familiar, and call it safety. But familiarity is not safety. It's just repetition. Discomfort is the signal that repetition has finally been challenged. Transformation threatens the version of you that learned how to survive. That version doesn't want to disappear quietly. It resists. It creates anxiety. It generates doubt. It whispers that you're making a mistake. That resistance shows up as discomfort, not because you're on the wrong path, but because you're leaving an old one. Discomfort exposes attachments, the things you didn't realize you were holding on to until they start slipping. Old identities, old coping mechanisms, old excuses. You feel unsettled because something inside you knows you can't carry all of it forward. Transformation requires shedding. And shedding always feels like loss before it feels like relief. People mistake discomfort for danger because it triggers the nervous system. Your body reacts before your logic catches up. You feel tension, restlessness, irritation, fear. But danger and growth feel similar at first. One threatens your survival. The other threatens your comfort. Most people don't know how to tell the difference, so they treat both the same and retreat. Discomfort also removes certainty. You no longer know who you are in the old way, but you haven't fully become who you're turning into. That in-between space is uncomfortable because it's undefined. There's no script, no guarantee, no familiar role to play, just exposure. And exposure feels risky to anyone who learned to stay safe by staying predictable. Transformation doesn't ask for permission. It applies pressure until something gives. That pressure shows up as discomfort in relationships, routines, thoughts, environments that no longer align. Things that once felt fine suddenly feel tight, heavy, irritating. That's not random. That's incompatibility surfacing. People often try to numb discomfort instead of listening to it. They distract themselves, rationalize, blame others, label it anxiety and medicate it away emotionally. But discomfort isn't an enemy. It's information. It's telling you that staying the same is no longer sustainable. There's a reason comfort zones rarely produce change. Comfort reinforces existing systems. Discomfort forces reevaluation. It asks questions comfort never would. Why does this feel wrong now? Why am I restless? Why does this no longer satisfy me? Those questions are uncomfortable because the answers require change. Transformation also rearranges power. Old patterns lose control. Old roles lose relevance. That creates internal conflict. Part of you wants growth, another part wants familiarity. That conflict feels like discomfort. You feel pulled in two directions. That tension is not a sign to stop. It's a sign something is shifting. People who grow don't avoid discomfort. They learn to sit inside it without panicking. They stop treating unease as an emergency. They recognize it as a phase, temporary, purposeful, necessary. They don't rush to escape it. They observe it, they let it reshape them. Discomfort also strips illusions. It reveals where you were pretending, where you were settling, where you were tolerating things that didn't align with who you were becoming. That revelation hurts. Clarity often does before it heals. The mistake people make is assuming transformation should feel empowering from the start. It rarely does. It feels destabilizing first, confusing, lonely, uncomfortable. Empowerment comes later, after the old structure collapses and a new one forms. You can't skip demolition and still build something different. Discomfort doesn't mean you're failing. It means something old is dissolving, something familiar is loosening. Something new is trying to take shape but hasn't stabilized yet. That process feels chaotic from the inside. Those who quit during discomfort often say it wasn't meant for them. What they really mean is they mistook the pressure of growth for a sign of danger. They wanted transformation without friction, but friction is the mechanism. Discomfort is the doorway most people walk past because it looks threatening, but behind it is the only version of change that actually lasts, the kind that rewires habits, reshapes identity, alters direction. Anything that comes without discomfort rarely stays, because it didn't cost you anything internally. If nothing feels uncomfortable, nothing is changing. Comfort keeps you intact. Discomfort breaks you open, and being broken open is the only way something new gets in. Transformation doesn't arrive gently. It arrives through tension, through pressure, through moments where you feel unsure of who you are becoming, but certain you can't go back to who you were, through that uneasy space where old stability dissolves and new strength hasn't fully formed yet. Through the quiet understanding that discomfort isn't the problem, it's the process unfolding whether you resist it or not.